Welcome, my friends, to the Beggars and Brawlers podcast. This is episode number 16, recorded Tuesday, the 4th of May, 2021, so may the 4th be with you. And today I have a special treat for you, a talk with the inimitable Virginia McClain. Virginia McClain thinks dangling from the tops of 100-foot cliffs is a good time. She also enjoys hauling a 50-pound backpack all over the Grand Canyon and sleeping under the stars. Sometimes she likes running for miles through the desert, mountains, or wooded flatlands, and she always loves getting lost in new places where she may or may not speak the language. From surviving earthquakes in Japan to putting out a small forest fire in Montana, Virginia has been collecting stories from a very young age. She works hard to make her fiction as adventurous as her life, and her life as adventurous as her fiction. Both take a lot of imagination. She recently moved to Winnipeg with her husband, a Manitoba native, and their dog. What that bio doesn't say is Virginia also summons this amazing online conference from thin air every year, QuaranCon, which you can find links to in the show notes, and creates anthologies because she wants to, like the one coming out later this year on grief and healing with a story from yours truly. Yeah, she seems like a force of nature in the indie fantasy community, at least in my part of that fantasy community. She also happens to be my SBFBO nemesis. We were both finalists, and I swear we were neck and neck the entire way. And we have all kinds of weird connections that come out in the interview, so I won't bore you with them now. In addition to all that, she's a talented cover designer and a mother, which we also talk about in the interview, and a fearless snow runner, which I have a lot of respect for. So we have a great conversation on writing non-European fantasy and why mothers are notably absent from fantasy and shouldn't be, as well as details on her upcoming book, which is awesome, and a special guest appearance, which I will say no more about. So without further ado, Virginia McClain. All right, friends, I'm here with Virginia McClain, the fearless author of the Chronicles of Gensokai. V, what's up? How you doing?
Living. Which, honestly, after the last year is kind of a win.
Yeah, for sure. Especially so you live in Winnipeg, so is there still snow on the ground?
No, it's melted.
Amazing.
Now. But it's going to be -4 overnight. That's Celsius. So only yeah, it's going to be just like 30, 28 degrees, something like that. Not super cold.
So that's the bizarre thing about us that I feel like our listeners should know is that we keep trading places in life. Because I live in Colorado. You used to live here.
Yep.
I'm from the slightly less frozen north of North Dakota, and you're in the same plains just across the political boundary.
That's right. I'm across the imaginary line.
And we both lived in Japan, in prefectures that were next to each other.
Yeah, I know I was in Yamagata, but where were you?
I was in Miyagi, Ken.
You were in Miyagi?
I was in Miyagi. I lived in Sendai.
Wait, what year? Okay, I know we had this conversation. What years were you there?
Okay, I'm going to date myself. I was there 2004 is when I lived in Sendai, and I was in Japan until 2008. But okay. I moved to Tokyo after a year or so, and then Kanagawa.
Nice.
So I became a city boy. I loved Sendai and Miyagi and Tohoku, though.
You left the year before I got there. I got there in 2009. I'm sure we had this conversation before, back when I interviewed you for
Probably, yes.
But I don't even remember because my memory is garbage these days.
I mean, I don't either, and the listeners don't, so we're good.
Definitely right, yeah. Yeah.
I would put a link to that one, but you asked so many embarrassing questions.
So many embarrassing questions. Oh no.
That's what I remember. That was my takeaway. And that I got really hot because I was in my semi-trailer and I drank a lot of caffeine.
You were definitely in your semi-trailer. That was very memorable. I did not. I'm sorry that I embarrassed you. I didn't mean to.
No, you didn't. You didn't. I'm just being dramatic.
Okay. I also sent you the questions in advance, didn't I?
Yeah, you did, which, to be fair, I feel like I thought of a lot more questions for you than I sent you yesterday or the day before, so...
Well, that's fine. I read them, but I didn't, actually prep them, even though I saw a couple that I was like, oh, I should think about that, and now I've already forgotten what they were, but...
Well, let me try to find those ones in particular.
Yes, just hone right in on that.
So, tell me about this book.
I assume by this book you mean the latest one that's coming out next week.
Yes, very much so.
Okay. This next book is called Sairo's Claw. Sairo. It's kind of hard to like string it into an English sentence and really like properly pronounce it, or not hard.
You sound pretentious if you're like making the long O.
Yeah, exactly. Cyto's claw. Because I'm just gonna bounce right into an English possessive and then an English word right after.
Right. It makes me want to say like kuda instead of claw, and then
or
whatever the word for claw is. I'm not that good at Japanese.
I totally looked it up ages ago because I considered putting the entire title in Japanese, and then skipped out on that because but
it's set in Japan, kind of.
It's not set in Japan, but it's set in Gensokai, which is a fictional nation inspired by feudal Japan. And it is, so here's the deal. It's a little bit odd. It's timeline-wise the third book in the Chronicles of Gensokai. However, it is the first book in the Gensokai Kaigai sub-series. There it is. So it's kicking off a new series that's set in the same world, brand new characters, brand new plot, and you need absolutely no familiarity with Blade's Edge or Trader's Hope in order to enjoy it. Awesome. There are some cameos and some history and stuff that will be more entertaining to you if you've read Blade's Edge and Trader's Hope, but that's just like a bonus. It's not at all a requirement. And the expectation is that there will be a lot of new readers starting on this book who may or may not decide to go read the other ones. So
awesome. Yeah, I've read Blade's Edge and not Trader's Hope, and I started reading this one and got like pathetically not very far into it because my own book is supposed to be out 2 days ago. It's not.
Yay, congrats on the not release.
Thanks. Yeah, my sale's going great. But I really liked the chapter and a half I read.
Woo! All right.
Yeah. But yeah, I think it's really interesting, like the Japanese inspired. I was wondering how you're going to describe it, because in Blade's Edge, like I know where we are and I can picture this stuff, but you're not like, there's nothing historically recognizable and even like geographically recognizable.
Nope. Yeah. It's not based on the landmass of Japan. And that's kind of the thing that I want people to know, because I used to have a whole author's note explaining how it was in Japan.
Right.
And then I sort of got reamed for having an author's note explaining that it was in Japan. But the problem is that, it's not historical fantasy. It absolutely isn't. Yeah. And the biggest thing that I want people to know about that is that Japan's history is very, very different from Gensokai's, and actually not as misogynistic as this period in Gensokai's history, which is like a huge portion of Blade's Edges.
Yeah. I mean, and it could be surprising if you know Japan's history, like, wait, more misogynistic than that? And then you read Blade's Edge and you're like, yes. No spoilers, but yes, there is some misogyny.
Quite a lot of it. Yes. And more than Japan. But interestingly, like Japan's misogyny slider, like in like feudally, Japan was better than Europe by leaps and bounds, right? So feudal Japan it was messed up for a lot of reasons, right? Because any feudal system is messed up, because if your system is about peasants and people above peasants who get to do whatever they want to the peasants, that's hugely problematic for everyone, regardless of sex and gender. But those things were equally bad everywhere that had a feudal system. But women who were in the ruling class had way more options than women in the ruling class in a European feudal system, for the most part. And again, like there's, Europe had a lot of different like microcosms of feudalism, so it varied from place to place. But so that's a thing that I like, that in particular makes this inspired by feudal Japan, but not actually feudal Japan, because actual feudal Japan wasn't this bad by any means. I mean, wasn't that bad in terms of misogyny. And meanwhile, there are other things in Gensokai that are just different. Like there's just a lot of it that's different. I sort of like the way that a ton of fantasy books aren't actually about medieval Europe, right?
Totally.
Just do things, take some bits and pieces to make it feel kind of like medieval Europe, and don't but don't actually, use history, but just sort of give you that old-timey feel. I wanted to do that, but take the old-timey feel from not Europe.
Totally.
And that's with Gensoka in particular. But the other thing is that like the world is not Earth. And that, like, without any major spoilers, because I think it becomes pretty clear in early on in this book, is more readily apparent in Cyro's Claw. And there are reasons that it was not apparent in Blade's Edge and Trader's Hope. So
yeah. So for everyone who's hearing the little noises in the background, we have a special guest tonight, Cedar.
Yep. My daughter has come up to join me here.
I feel like her appearance is actually kind of appropriate because this book is about moms.
It totally is. That's true. Yeah. And
was that an intentional choice?
Yeah. I mean, well, yes, it certainly was. I mean, the character that came to me that made me want to write this book was, there were two things that I really wanted to do. I wanted a woman warrior who was a hardened fighter who'd been through a lot.
Yeah.
And was, sort of like the jaded, cynical 20 years into fighting for a living character that we don't often see as a woman.
Right.
And I wanted her to be a mom. And so that was the spark of this book. Just like, I think the very first scene I wrote for this book, which I originally thought was going to be the opening scene, is now like 25% into the book. But it's one of the early scenes with this character. It's not the very first one with her though, but it was originally going to be like just the start of the book, and it's her in this like wicked battle, but like trying not to have her daughter get stabbed by the bad guys because she has inadvertently brought her child into battle.
Childcare issues.
Childcare issues. That is a recurring theme in this book. Major childcare issues.
Nanny couldn't come, so we're going to war, honey. Sorry.
Yeah, almost like that. And actually, at the beginning, that was sort of my thought. Not like we're going to war with the kid, but that like sort of bigger scope battles and stuff. And as a separate idea, that this does not enter into this plot at all. But I had this thought about writing a series that would be these little like sort of shorter adventures with a mom-daughter like buddy combo, and where the daughter is little but still really helpful in battle somehow. Nice. And I think I've actually kind of got the setup for that with these characters, but that's not what this book is. I mean, don't get me wrong, Itachi, the daughter, has her uses, and is very gung-ho to be useful, but nice. But despite being 3.5, but this is not the book. This is not a book where she's gonna like fight a bunch of battles as a 3.5-year-old, which I think is problematic, right? Like, and that was the thing.
Yeah, it's a little young to get started.
Yeah, I had a really hard time coming up with a legit reason where you would like be living a life where you were constantly fighting and intentionally bringing your kid into battle and danger often, right? Like in the case of this book, it sort of happens by accident.
Is it
like
the book you're talking about? Mama.
Cedar? No, not right now.
But it's about something you're talking about.
I know it is. Okay, go ahead.
Well,
here's Cedar.
Well, since I am 4.5-year-old and also but I'm not real in the real world, then I can actually fight.
You can actually fight, yeah.
Because they're just pretend bad guys.
Just pretend bad guys.
So I can
actually
you can fight pretend bad guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're
That's
allowed
a good idea. Yeah.
So
I saw your Twitter post looking for like recommendations for other fantasy that involves moms, and I felt like it was crickets for a little bit. Do you feel like on reflection that like moms are kind of underrepresented?
Yeah, I mean, that was actually part of why I asked, not because I was like, oh, I bet I'll get like 300 recommendations for great fantasy books that feature moms, but rather there's got to be more than I was thinking of. And in fact, I'd forgotten one excellent example that I've read and enjoyed the heck out of, which is The Wolf of Warren. So even in the ones that I listed, I was missing some.
Yeah.
But I was not expecting to get a ton of recommendations because, yeah, I think it is an underrepresented group. And I actually just wrote a blog post for Elizabeth Tabler's Before We Go blog about how moms get sidelined in fantasy and and why that happens and why it probably shouldn't.
Yeah, I mean, like, you want to talk about a character who's invested and like has something to lose, like
Put a parent in, right?
Yeah.
And that, I mean, it's true for either, it's true for moms and dads. It's not it doesn't have to be a mom thing specifically.
Thank you.
But I do feel like we get a little bit but we get a little bit more of dads as in fantasy stories, right? We it's still not super common, but it is more common. We still get the hardened warrior who has finally settled down and then gets pulled back into war or battle or on a mission or
totally. And a lot of times the family is like the absent motivation. It's like, I got to get back to my kids, or I got to fight to protect my homeland, etc.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And orphans are such a trope. It's
orphans
like,
are
let's just get rid of the parents, which like it's convenient, but
it is very convenient, and that is, I think, why it happens, right? Like, I think it's done so often out of convenience rather than malice, right? It's not because people are like, I don't want
to write a mom,
but it's like, well, how do you can't make, if you're writing young adult main characters, and I truly mean, like, even like 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds, doesn't really matter, but it's very difficult to put them on the path to heroism if their parents are still alive, because any parent that is like, I mean, if it were me, if Cedar is like 18 and is being asked to save the world, I'm sorry, but no, I'm going to be either fighting beside her or doing my best to keep her out of it,
bringing a helmet and raincoats.
I'm not just going to let her go off to fight whatever thing because she's the chosen one. I'm like, F that, I'm coming to, I have your back, and then that doesn't, if your whole thing is about a person finding themselves on their hero's journey, then that doesn't necessarily work out. So I get it. I get why people like fridge parents. But and I've done it. Like Blade's Edge, both of those are orphans. I've killed my fair share of parents. So it's it's nice enough if just like the parents are around, and care about their kids is another nice thing that doesn't happen all that often. Like, they're alive and they want to be helpful. So even just having like parents as a nice supporting role is rare enough.
Yeah, totally.
But then why just the supporting role? Like, what about having children makes you not the main character of your own story anymore?
It makes you a story that we think people don't want to read.
Well, right. I guess that's what the preconception is. But I think that's because of the assumption that like you stop having adventures when you have children. Suddenly your biggest adventure is, diaper changing and cleaning vomit off your clothes.
Which it can be very adventurous.
It can be a challenge. But it is, but that's not to say that you can't have other adventures.
Totally.
And I think maybe it's because my parents dragged us all over the world when I was a kid.
That's awesome.
It was awesome, and I'm super lucky. Like, I can't even count the ways in which I'm fortunate for that. But it certainly left me with the impression that you don't have to stop having adventures when you have children. That's not an inherent part of becoming a parent. But I do think society kind of makes those assumptions, and especially then in our entertainment, I think that it is often a choice we make to not follow those stories. I also think that it's disproportionately pointed at women. That even if we allow men to still get called to adventure after they've had children, we don't really allow that with women in fantasy. Obviously, we can try as a society to stop that, and I think women have been saying F you to that for a really long time. But but it, it doesn't get represented in media as much.
I wanted to say that, like, I feel like also there's a societal style of parenting that, at least in the US, like, sort of encourages not to have adventures. Like, you have to watch your kid at all times. Nobody's going to help. You can't leave.
Right. We put an enormous amount of the value of a woman as a person on her ability to make a family.
Right.
It doesn't have to be procreation, adoption, just caring for other people, but we put a huge amount of that on women, and therefore when a woman has finally done that, when she has procreated in some form or made a family group, her story is done, because that is the pinnacle of her existence. And that, I think, is a big part of the difference in the way we treat a woman parent versus a man parent, like a mom versus a dad, in terms of representation in media. A dad can still have an adventure because a dad is a person who inherently has their own story and deserves that arc. And a mom doesn't, because what more could she want than to have created a family?
Right.
And
she's fulfilled her biggest purpose.
Right. And there's just so many things that are icky about that.
Yeah, totally.
And so it's, it's hard to even know where to start on that front. But
well, you start by writing a book that's different.
Well, sure. I mean, or you sort of culminate with that. I mean, like, for a long time, I just pushed back on the idea that I wanted to have a kid at all. And like, so personally, there were a lot of different ways that I dealt with it. But the other thing is that, so it does two things. It devalues humans who have decided to have families, and it also devalues people who've decided not to. And you're just like, this is sort of a horrible.
Yeah, like, let's just stop like simplifying women into reproductive ability.
Right. But the idea that like a woman's story is done because she's finally got a family is just weird and awful. I personally continue to be the main character in my own story, even though this little one is 4.5 years old.
You created a new main character. You created a new main character, but you're both.
I created a new main character. That's right. And part of my story now is to help her tell hers, but it's not the only part. I
totally.
Still,
Thank
like,
God. I mean, in the introduction where I praised you to death, which I haven't recorded yet. We all know all the things that you're doing. We in the finalist group that's still around from the Spiffo 5, where I'll basically stand in awe of Virginia, because like, I'm just gonna make a con happen out of nothing, and like, let's do an anthology over here, and here's another book, and I went running in the blizzard and figured out all my life's problems while I did it.
All my books problems. I don't
That's
figure
true,
out my life problems while I'm running. I wish I could.
That was our conversation beforehand, was how she can't listen to audiobooks because when she runs, she just automatically processes her own books, and I said that it was a superpower.
It feels like a superpower, but running for me is sort of, it's not a superpower, but it is like the thing that fixes me. My brain works better in every possible way after I've gone or while I'm going for a run, and when I'm running frequently. So that is absolutely a thing for me. But I also think y'all overestimate how much I actually accomplish at any given time. I feel
from
like
the outside, it looks
most
quite
people
amazing.
Are great. Well, the facade is working perfectly then, but don't look behind the curtain. So women continue to have their own stories even after they become parents, and that is a thing that I think is worth exploring. And so I finally wrote a book that is all about moms and children. It's not just about a mom, it's about a mom and her mother and the granddaughter, and then so it spans a couple generations. And it's not just about one mom, because Torako is married to Raku, so they're both moms, and it's and they have different experiences as parents, and it's also about, I mean, like, now I can't, there are too many different familial relationships to outline that may or may not be spoilers, and so I don't even want to get into all the different things, but it's it was fun for me to write a character who is a warrior and a mom and the hero of the story. That was really fun. I enjoyed the heck out of it, and I enjoyed so many things about this book. It's kind of silly. I always enjoy what I'm writing to some degree, but to enjoy it so much that I really like loved doing the rewrite is next level for me. And that this is the first time that's happened, but I loved rewriting this book, and I basically rewrote every single word of it.
I know. I found that insane when you told this. I was like, I could never do that.
But you actually thought things out.
Well, yes, but like you wrote the book, you deleted the book and wrote it again, right?
I didn't delete it because I never delete anything. And this is my favorite thing about Scrivener. I wrote the book, I put it in its own folder right below the new draft, and then I basically wrote each scene from scratch.
That is crazy. And yeah, to enjoy that is extra crazy. That's another superpower. I cannot.
I can't call it a superpower because I have no notion that this is a consistent thing. It happened this time.
It's so weird how like some books will just like have their own process.
Yeah.
You know, like something about the story or where you're at in life.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, or which story you choose to tell when. I mean, for this one, I just haven't lost enthusiasm yet. Although I will say, as I start to read it aloud for this proofread, I've actually been afraid to start reading it because I'm worried I'm going to hate it. I don't think I'm going to hate it, but I'm afraid. I'm actually afraid. I was like, I don't want to start reading this. What if I realize it sucks? Like right now I'm in this haze of like, I loved the rewrite, so it must be a good book, right? What if in reading it aloud, I'm like, oh, this is actually terrible.
Oh man. And it's like, yeah. So we were talking beforehand about how I just finished narrating the audiobook for my book that's coming out. And it's the same situation of like, I thought the book was really good, and it is good. You should all buy it. But at a certain point, I was like, oh no, there's one too many fight scenes, or this fight scene's a little too long. There's a lot of fighting in this book. And I'm like, and I feel like there are cartoonists who are like, as soon as I like ink it, or as soon as I like put the color on, it's never changing. And that's how I feel about like narration for audiobooks. Like once I have spoken the words out loud and recorded them in like a public fashion, we're all done.
Yeah.
So I had some of that fear and some of it played out.
Yeah, that is fair. And it's I do agree that once you've done the audiobook, that pretty much solidifies it, because audiobook edits are no fun. And
yeah, totally.
And they need to be the same version. And my daughter is pushing a bunch of buttons on a phone and saying the numbers aloud.
As long as it's not the computer, because things could get crazy. Okay. You're using to record. I was going to ask about so like speaking of the adventure potential of mother and daughter in this book, do you feel like where are you going from here? Is there going to be more chronicles?
Yeah, so this book is, like I said, it kicks off a new subseries, and there's at least one more book for the big plot that this sort of kicks off, which really sort of happens on the shoulders. Like at the early part of the book and the late part of the book, we see the things that are sort of the kickoff to not this book, right? Nice. Whereas the majority of this plot just like happens and is self-contained. So while I very much hope that people will want to pick up the next book right at the end of this one, because there is sort of a cliffhanger. It's a cliffhanger on the epilogue, right? Like the whole book, like the plot wraps, right? And it does
feel satisfied.
And you're like, yeah, great. That was a great ending. I hope, right? Like if I've done it well, like, yeah, solid ending. And then it's like, and but then this happened. And then you're like, oh crap, like I need to know what happens next. I hope, right? That's if people are invested in the characters, they're gonna be like, which you can't leave it there.
I feel like cliffhanger in the epilogue is classy, because like, you know, it was an epilogue. You didn't have to read it. So the series, the other series that I have, The Empire of Resonance, there's 4 books. There should be 5. And I think I'm literally just going to delete the last chapter when my publisher puts out the last one. Because if the epilogue isn't there, you have all the warm fuzzies and you're like, it's all good. And then the epilogue is like, there definitely has to be a book 5. So I might like put it in. I'm like, if you'd like to torture yourself, email me and I will send you the actual final chapter of this book. But I don't think I want like the like the angry letters that I'll get if I leave it there and don't write book 5.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. Don't do that. If you don't think you want to write it, then don't do that.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing. There's so many things to write.
There are too many ideas. It's so hard. I'm actually really glad that this idea fit in Ginsokai and worked well for it, because I love writing in Ginsokai.
Yeah.
And especially now that we've moved past the really depressing part.
All the misogyny.
All the misogyny, so much misogyny, so much really awful, terrible, oppressive misogyny.
Yeah.
And not that that's like, everyone should know that that's not an instant fix. And part of the reason that it's a duology is not because everything was miraculously fine at the end of the first challenge. But now this book starts 7 years after the end of the second book. And even that is not enough to cure, centuries of big problems. However, there are a lot of, it's a little bit spoilery to talk about it too much. There are some directions that this book takes that move us very quickly away from that sort of darker history. And so it's letting me still play in Ginsokai, and then also play with a place that's not as sad. not as sad, not as dark. And so I think that's part of why I really enjoyed this. It had a lot of the elements that I love playing with, but wasn't mired in this really depressing oppressive government. And so like things are looking up societally, right? Like and so that made it a lot more fun to write. And so then it felt more it felt easier to have this sort of laid back, and it's not really laid back, like there's some stuff happening, right? But but just like the banter between people and stuff, and there's a little bit of lightheartedness to this book that is not present in Blade's Edge Trader's Hope.
Right, I was getting that impression even reading the beginning of it, and I was like, has the slider moved? Like, I don't think that the first book, or my impression of the first two, is like, you were not full grimdark, but like misogyny, etc. It was fairly grim. Do you feel like you've slid a little bit more towards like not lightheartedness, but
action adventure romp is more
romp is such a good word.
Action adventure romp is way more the tone of this book, and I'm glad. I think that's why I've enjoyed writing it and rewriting it. So I mean, like, I don't think I could have written Blade's Edge or Trader's Hope in 2020 without there was too much of that already happening.
Totally.
Reality was far too close to that dystopia, and so I would not have been able. I mean, like, some people get inspired by that and can write the thing that's going on. I did not. That was not my way of reacting.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a double dose instead of spicing up life with something a little different. I mean,
instead of an escape.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if the books that I've written in the last while were dark. I think I might have double dosed it personally. I was like, you know what? The world is dark and my character's got a lot of problems. But there's some banter too.
I mean, there can be catharsis in that too, right? It's not where my head was. And it was not what I needed to do was play and have more fun and write the grumpy wolf spirit of my heart. And write characters who are sarcastic to each other but love each other a lot. Just like I needed to write those people. And so this is the thing, right? Like, I loved this book so much. I loved writing the first draft, and I loved doing the rewrite. And I even still loved it while I was doing my editing pass after my editor got through with it. I was going in and doing, like, I still went in and I was fixing stuff, but I'd get distracted reading the book and I would be like,
that's awesome.
I need to stop. I've got to like focus. I'm trying to do 2 edits. And instead I'm like, and then reading the, and so that was great. I love it. And I love that I loved it so much, but I don't, and part of me is like, I loved it so much. Shouldn't that mean that it's like a really good book? And part of me is like, well, sort of, but I think actually what it just means is it was the book I really needed to write. And I hope that readers enjoy it on even a portion of the level that I enjoyed it on. But I don't think that it's, like gonna win a bunch of awards or anything necessarily. Like I think it's a good version of a fun fantasy action adventure romp. Like, I think it's pretty solid. I love what I've done with it. I loved writing it, but I don't think that inherently makes it like an amazing, mind-blowing book. I think it just makes it the book that I really needed to write. So
yeah, but I feel like that book that you needed to write like is going to be so much better than the one that you felt like you had to write and wrote. Like the passion and enjoyment is going to come through.
I hope so. And I've gotten one review so far that was very enthusiastic.
Awesome.
From a new reader who's never read any of my stuff.
Cool.
And so that's really fun. And he loved it, and he got a lot of the stuff I was trying to do with it too. Like he did a BookTube review of it, and I watched it, and he clearly got some of the things that I was shooting for, and so I had a few yay,
awesome.
cheering while he was talking about it. So yeah, I that's hopeful, right? Because that's not not a friend of mine, and it's not a person who's read a bunch of my stuff.
You should send me the link, and I'll put it in the show notes if people want to check
it out. Yeah, if anybody wants to check it out. Raoul reads. And I've started watching his other YouTube videos, and I like his channel. He's very enthusiastic about it.
That's awesome.
But yeah, so that's I'm okay, great. That's a good start. Hopefully more people take it that way. And enjoy it for those reasons. But
you just never know. I mean,
you never know. And I'm not good enough at marketing to make something explode. So, we'll see. But the best thing about having enjoyed writing it so much is that if nobody likes it,
right. As opposed to writing the bully romance that you felt like would sell, and then it doesn't, and you didn't even like doing it. Blah.
Right. Yeah. So I enjoyed the heck out of writing it. So and I learned a bunch of stuff writing it too. So it's just there's no loss. Luckily since I did my own cover, and my editor lets me pay her in installments. So there's if nobody buys it, I will be sad because I wrote a book that I loved and nobody else liked it, but I won't be heartbroken, and it won't end my career or anything. So totally. But I hope people like it. I love it.
I'm gonna read the rest of it. I mean, it wasn't just prep for the interview, so I'll tell you the truth.
Yes, please. That is the thing though. I do worry about my friends reading it and being like, oh, it was great, and being like, yeah, but you're gonna say that because you're my friend. So
it's so the random reviews that matter. The people who have absolutely no reason to say they like it, saying they liked it. I love my friends and family. I'm like, what do you say about my book? I have to ignore it. I'm sorry, but you like me, so you're gonna find something So where can people find you and all the good things that you do in this book, other than the link notes?
Well, the good news is this release is wide, and you can find it through a UBL that's very easy to remember because it is bookstoread.com/Cyro's Claw. So that's handy. And you can find me at virginiamcclain.com or virginiamcclain.ca. And you can also find a bunch of additional information about all my books there. So for anyone who would like to read the first two books in the series, I can't currently discount Blade's Edge for reasons that are not interesting to anyone listening, but Trader's Hope will be 99 cents for from May 3rd to May 10th. And Blade's Edge is only $4.99. So if anyone feels like picking up the entire set, again, no reason to read those first two in order to enjoy Cyro's Claw. You can just jump in right at Cyro's Claw. But should you feel like you want those other books, they will be discounted, or Trader's Hope will be discounted so much that you'd be spending $6.
You can get the whole thing for $10.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So there's that.
Cool. And I'm going to put those links in the show notes. So all you lazy listeners, just look at the show notes and click. You're not lazy. We love you.
And for those who like audiobooks, Blade's Edge does exist as an audiobook. Trader's Hope and Cyro's Claw will both be coming out as audiobooks later this year.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on. Thanks
Thanks for having
to
me.
Cedar for being our extra special guest in a very timely fashion, as we were talking
Extra-
about moms.
Extra special guest. Yeah, very timely, but
Already having adventures as a podcaster at 4 years old.
she's always ahead of her time.
All right, friend. Well, it was good to talk.
It was great to talk to you. Thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate you taking the time and letting me ramble on a lot. I swear I'm more efficient in my writing, people.
There's a cliffhanger. All right.
Thanks so much, Levi. Take care.
Totally.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed that. I realized afterwards that my voice sounds very tinny and small, but I am not the focus in that one. Virginia is a dear friend, in addition to being my SBFBO nemesis. And having gotten a few more chapters into Cyro's Claw than when we talked, I can confirm it's worth a read. So you can find all those links to her books and socials in the show notes. And I'll see you next episode for another preview of Witch of Wealth and Ruin.
For more information on Levi Jacobs and his books, including the award-winning Tidecaller Chronicles, please visit www.levijacobs.com. Or for a free audiobook, only available to podcast listeners, go to www.levijacobs.com/free. Thanks for listening, and read on.